All right, my friends. So far, we've seen one way to consume context inside a component, and that's by using this static context type. So we're saying static context type and setting it equal to whatever context we want to use. Then we get access to that context object on this, and these are all fine to do. There is another way I'd like to show you, and you can use it as well to consume context. So this other way is by using a context consumer. Now, doesn't that make sense? So let's just open up the theme context just like this. We have this provider given to us on the theme context when we create it up in here. We also get a consumer on this theme context, and that's what we're going to use this time inside this component. So let's see the inner workings here. So I'll use it on the navbar component again. Let's open it up. And now we're going to consume the context with context consumer property. Okay, so first of all, let's delete this static context type. We don't need that anymore. I'll keep these theme context import at the top and deconstruction right here, because I'm going to use them in a minute. Right now, we're going to use the consumer on that theme context. So in the return statement down here, instead of just returning this JSX, I'm going to want to return the theme context.consumer, like so. And then inside this consumer tag, we'll put all of this different template. But first of all, this consumer expects us to pass in a function. So I'm going to open up curly braces inside the theme context, and then open up normal parentheses and call a function. So this function takes in a parameter, which is the context, and this parameter is going to help us to reach context data. We're going to see that in a minute. So then this function is going to return some JSX, and what I'm going to do is just grab all this stuff and paste it inside of here. All right, so now what we're doing here is we're using the theme context consumer right here, and what this is going to do is consume this theme context so that we get access to that context data inside this function right here. All right, so now inside this function, we are returning some JSX and then reaching out the theme context with this parameter. And we can use any of the data from this context inside this template, just like we did before. But this time, we just have this parameter instead of this context. So I'm just going to copy this stuff right here and paste it inside this function. All right, so now we need to change this context to just context, like so. All right, so now we're doing exactly the same that we did before. We are reaching out these data from theme context and deciding to which context that we want to apply on our component with the ternary operator. Then we're going to apply that theme to the component over here. How's that sound? All right, so let's save all this and check it out in the browser. All right, see, so it still all works just like it did before. And if we open up console, I'll right-click and select Inspect, and then I'm going to go to the Components tab. All right, so now we can see Context Consumer right here, and we can also see all the context data right here as well. And right now, the dark theme is applied to our components, and we can see that here it says, is dark theme true? All right, so again, all we're doing here is using the consumer of the theme context that we have created in here, and inside of that, we are using a function which takes in that context as a parameter. Very good. And then therefore, inside this function, we have access to that context object with destructuring some values from that context. And then see, we're setting the current theme, then we're just using that theme to output some different styles down here. So this is just another way of using context inside a component. So now that we've seen these two different ways, let's just review a little bit. We've seen the context consumer as well as the static context type. Now, you may be asking yourself, which one am I going to use? Well, both approaches have some pros and cons, but typically I prefer using this approach, the context consumer. That's the approach I like to use when using class components. So even if this context consumer approach seems a little messy in contrast to the static context type, the good thing about it is we can also use it in functional components. We haven't got there yet. But I'll give you an example. Let's say that we want to change this into a functional component. Well, it's still going to work because the context consumer works in both functional and class-based components. Yeah, so another benefit of this approach using the consumer is that we can consume multiple contexts in one component. But we can't do that by using the other approach, and we're going to see that later on. That's why I wanted to teach this in depth right now. So those are the two different ways to consume context in a component. All right, so we'll take a little break right here, come back in the next lesson. See you then.